Hello, everyone, and welcome back at the Illusion Horror Con. Now with panel 3, incorporating real life horror legends into RPG systems. And with me today, I have fantastic guests Gunilla Jonsson, Mikkel Petersén,
Hello.
and Petter Nallo, um, as well as my wife, Crystal. And we'll be yeah, talking a bit what it means to, I guess, play the true cult in this configuration. But before we do that, I want to ask Gunilla, can you give a brief introduction of who you are and what you do?
Well, I'm a Swedish role-playing game designer, and otherwise I work in a science fiction bookstore together with Michael, my husband. I've been I've made Cult together with Mike 30 years ago, and before that a Swedish game called Mutant. Uh, Apocalyptic fable game. So that's about my resume.
Okay, then handing over to Michael, the person right next to you.
Well, yeah, as Gunilla said, we've been doing this for a long time. We started out in the early 1980s, writing science fiction, fable, after the apocalypse, children's game almost. We did write a lot of role-playing games for the great, huge Swedish company Äventyrsspel, which in those days were making basically most of the Swedish role-playing games. We made a lot of supplements for them for different game systems. Then we created Cult in the early 1990s, which now lives on with Peter Nallo's excellent version. And since then, we've also been writing quite a lot of stuff for Swedish edition of Call of Cthulhu recently, and we're going to make a new secret project together with Petter regarding Cult.
Fantastic.
Very
And Petter
exciting.
Nallo.
Well, I did not create Cult in the 90s, but I bought it in the 90s when I was a 14-year-old. So all my sort of childhood trauma comes from Gunilla and Michael. Exactly. No, but I right now I'm sort of the creative director of Cult Divinity Lost, the 4th edition. Sort of try to bring people and writers together to continue the product line. Other than that, I work in the sort of computer game industry, but now it's more focused on role-playing games for me. So that's a little bit about me. I've done some other role-playing games before Cult in Swedish, so I have also a weird back catalog. Nothing with cute animals with muskets. That's Michael and Gunilla's area.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think to start off, since we have the topic of real life horror legends and myths, do you can you share maybe a memorable scenario setting or in that sense maybe system preference that where you had a real life horror legend incorporated or myth that you use for storytelling, and why did you choose that one?
That's an unexpected question.
I want to start answer it because I'm going to throw it at Mikael and Gunilla. I don't know if this is a real life horror legend, but I think that one of the first scenarios I played with Cult is a scenario where you meet Jesus or the Messiah, who is Jim Morrison from The Doors, and then you go away to skin the Pope. That was the first sort of scenario I played with Cult, and I think that's sort of a very extreme version of like using real life legends and religious figures. So I was going to throw that question to Mikael and Gunilla, who wrote this. How? Why? How?
It seemed like a good
And
idea
where
at
do
the
you
time.
purchase this scenario?
And I also think that the real horror in that story is, of course, the apocalypse, which the player characters bring about. So that is the real life horror story, if we want to call it that, from the Bible we use. And then we enhance that with using a rock star legend who died in a miserable way in Paris, and making him an emissary, a messiah of the absent god, herding the player characters into starting the apocalypse.
We should also remember that the Pope at that time were not the rather more kindly character we have these days. This was the days of a rather bad Pope, so...
And that totally makes it all right to skin him.
Yeah, sure. One should remember playing that scenario. We replayed it twice before the start of the convention in Sweden. We played it twice with two different groups to play test it before, and neither of these groups actually flayed the Pope. The whole point of the scenario was actually that the Dark Messiah, Jim Morrison, was wrong. You were not supposed to start apocalypse. You were not supposed to throw mankind out to the wolves, turning them back into insane gods again. You were actually supposed to say, no, we realize that this very charismatic Messiah, Jim Morrison, he is charismatic, he's extremely good looking, and he's nice, and he's got a reasonable way of telling us, but he's wrong. So we were rather surprised playing this scenario at the con, and out of these somewhat 35 groups who actually played the scenario at the con, I think one group did not flay the Pope.
Everybody likes to flay the Pope.
So that was a bit of the... But using things... I mean, cult is based upon the Abrahamic religions. It's based upon the concept of a distant god. It's based in the Gnostic tradition and in Kabbalah. So we started out using real-life religions and philosophies from the starting cult. So it's part of the game system. It's the heart almost of the game and the setting.
And we used fringe religious ideas like the Kabbalah and the Gnosticism, not mainstream ideas. So really that scenario is very central to the idea of the game as we made it. You are part of a fringe religious movement, and you go for the head honcho in the big religion who persecuted these fringes in the Middle Ages. So it's that historical access, I think, has been important for us as well in cult. As you mentioned, the Black Madonna, it takes parts of the Second World War and brings them forth into the early 1990s, for instance.
Peter, was there something intelligent to say after our ramblings?
No, no. I just think it is something that happens when you make that mix as well. You take ancient Gnosticism, you take the Pope, you take the apocalypse, and you take a real world sort of rock star, dead in this case, and you sort of just merge it together. And I think that sort of mix of what is ancient and I guess it's a bit wrong to say new with Jim Morrison, but still much newer than the Gnosticism of the Middle Ages, is something that feels very cult, because you have this feeling in cult that you can go into some sort of apartment block in the outskirts of some rundown city, and there in the apartment block you can find an angel that sort of served under the demiurge, and he lives there in squalor. It's sort of this mix between the divine and the ordinary, and you can use different legends to sort of build that. And I think that, and cult also has this feeling. I mean, Jim Morrison is sort of was, I should say, but like an icon, an iconic figure and you could sort of see how the sort of higher powers in cult could sort of be manifested through him as well. I mean, now he's the Messiah, but I think that it's interesting to use these iconic figures and like iconic movements that have sort of manifested in our reality and in our sort of collective minds to sort of tell stories.
I mean, we have a lot of those dramatic stories, like the siege of Leningrad we used in the Black Madonna. And of course, as people rightly have said, it's problematic for people who have a real connection to these very traumatic happenings, people who were in Leningrad, people who lost a lot of people during the Second World War. So you have to tread carefully, and maybe we didn't always do that in the early 90s. We just arched ahead, and well, it was a different time. So I think today we and everybody else are more careful in using these very traumatic happenings in storytelling. But still, it's part of the DNA of cult to do so.
We perhaps try to be a bit more personal when we use historical characters or historical events. We do try to be a bit more personal, put it down closer to a person or a group of persons rather than an entire point of the war like like Leningrad.
I think.
I think it. Sorry, no, go ahead.
I just wanted to mention for any viewers who might not be familiar that cult, in a sense, differs maybe from other horror role-playing games. In the sense that this horror is expected, and as Gunilla, you said, it's the heart and it's the true core of cult. So if you're uncomfortable with the topics discussed here, just make sure that this is one set of horror role-playing game that is focused on more a personalized horror rather than a entity mythos as an escapism RPG system, I feel like. Just wanted to throw that in between for viewers who might just join in.
Player discretion is advised.
Yeah.
For cult, Divinity Lost, and any other cult things.
But yeah,
we do recommend if people are not used to playing games like cult, they always should use either the cards of stop this discussion or the X sign, and be very sure that the player characters, or the players at least, are very much prepared for that. In cult, terrible things can happen, both to you and to people you know and love. So, and you might get some of your political views challenged, because most of us who do write this are rather, well, Americans would probably call us extremely left-wing. Here in Sweden, we are mostly used as liberals. But
not Petter, he's the hardcore Marxist.
Yeah, but we love Petter.
What? No, but I think there's it's a good point. Oh, I have so many things I want to say now. Where should I start? First of all, that I'm a hardcore Marxist. That was interesting, but no, I think that it's good. I mean, cult is of course set in our present day, and it is sort of involved with how the world looks today. And I would say any political spectrum or ideology will be challenged because most of them, I would say all of them, are part of the illusion that binds us. So if you are super engaged into right-wing ideology, or super engaged into feminism, or super engaged into Marxism, or super engaged into that, well, that's part of the prison that keeps us trapped. Your ideology is not true, like your religion is not true. I mean, in a sense, well, you can say the Abrahamic religions are true, but it's not what you think it is. So a cult is kind of rough in that sense. We have, and it sort of needs to be. We cannot say like, oh yeah, but we decide that your political standpoints are true in the game world, because the game world is so extreme in a sense that since the world is an illusion and this is a prison, so that these are the rules of the prison that keeps us trapped. But But I think it's good because it goes all over the scale, all over all scales. You can't say like this is right or this is wrong in that sense. Then you can sort of talk about what is best within the prison, of course. But I was going back a little bit to what you were saying about horror in Cult, which I also think is different to some other role-playing games. Not everyone, but I think that it's very obvious in Cult when you create your character that the horror is also very much tied to your character. All of you have like these dark secrets, and you are picking disadvantages that is tied to trauma, and often it is this trauma that allows you to start to realize that the world isn't what it is. You are sort of a bit broken, and when you're broken you can start to see through the cracks. And of course that is something you also need to be super careful about, because you don't perhaps want to relive your own trauma. So I think it's all a part of the conversation with the game master. But I think it also ties into like real life horror, real life legends, that we are using like real life trauma in creating your characters, because it's much, I would say, there in Cult it's a big focus on the player characters and who you are, because often the horror comes from inside you as well as from the outside, and I think that is quite a big difference compared to, I mean, Call of Cthulhu that Mikael and Gunilla has written, where your characters are the investigators of the supernatural, but you are very seldom the cause of it, which I would say in Cult you often are.
And it's also an important way to moderate the horror in Cult from the beginning. From the 30-year-old version of Cult, we had these dark secrets, because it's a way to make sure that you don't stumble into something that is impossible for you to play. It's a way to say from the beginning, I want to play about these dark secrets. Those dark secrets are out of bounds. So from the character creation, you can select what kind of horrors are acceptable here and what do we not want to talk about in this fora. So I think it's important. The rules enforces a certain censorship there.
I think so too. And you should also remember that concerning the difference between Cult and Call of Cthulhu, which is the other major horror playing game that at least Gunilla and I have been working on. As we started saying, in Call of Cthulhu, you are the investigators and you are fighting basically against evil cults and strange creatures from the outer reaches of space and time, the outer gods. And these outer gods are so extremely powerful that you are basically an insect. You're an ant. They probably won't even realize that we are here when they finally come back and kills us all. They just, some bloody ants here in my building. I better kill them all. If they even notice us. Probably they won't even do that. We probably just all pass away in horrible ways when they get back here. In Cult, on the other hand, we are the evil outer gods. We are the uncaring, insane monster gods that put entire universes into ruin before we got entrapped. Or if we went there on our own free will. We don't really know that. Gunilla and I have played somewhat with this in our novels, but basically somehow humanity got captured into this illusion. And who made it and why, we really don't know. But we are the enemy. We are the monsters in Cult.
But at the same time, it's not that different, because both games is about exploring your habitat, as to speak, as many role-playings are. In Cult, we are imprisoned, confused, have only parts of our memories, but still, I think most characters want to know something about where they are, why are we here, what is about to happen. So it's not that different from Call of Cthulhu in that sense, I think. of course, you can play it as a Kammerspiel and just have conflicts between the characters. Many play Cult as that. But if you use the meta plot, then it kind of exploration comes into play, I think.
Yeah, one of the great things about Cult that we always loved was that first moment when the player characters actually realized, wait a minute, there's something very, very strange going on here. Where are we? What is this huge city in ruins that we finally got some kind of short view into? Where did it go? What happened to this building? Why is this strange police officer behaving like he is? Why does he have a much huger, larger shadow cast behind him than he actually is? So it's when the cracks start to appear, when the reality starts to be questioned, that's part of the moment where I liked most about Cult. Just a personal reflection there.
I totally agree. I think in the beginning, I think I struggled too much with the concept also the mechanics of Cult, in a sense that I was so kind of primed from D&D to Call of Cthulhu. It's an investigatory skill set, like, and I not really done too much PBTA before, in the sense that I was a bit overwhelmed as a GM, but then it actually took a couple of sessions only to understand how, as a game master, I feel like also the personal connection in Cult, as we said before, is so much stronger that you need to be able to read the room, the players, their reactions, because as it is so personal, it is also so much more fun to explore this kind of shared horror and uncomfortableness together, that I haven't had experience in few other systems, to be fair. But Crystal, do you have anything to add or to ask?
I think I would do a kind of follow-up question to all the great points before. So, given that, you guys mentioned the, I guess we would call it the horror contract at this point. Are there other ways that you can introduce these real-world topics into the scenarios, besides the obvious of like having a conversation? I guess this would be more like the nuts and bolts writing the scenario. Is there a way to have a sort of maybe light touch of a real world situation and introducing it that way into a scenario like Cult or other scenarios?
I absolutely love using real settings for role-playing games, and always have. I started out GMing Call of Cthulhu, and I think if you do research in a place, in a time, in people, you will find stories. And if you twist those stories into horror stories, then you have a great scenario. So for me, start with the research, and then the rest will come. I don't know about Petter and Mike.
Well, I also think that I think this is a balance. Okay, I will take one step back first. I think that when you incorporate real life, real world horrors, it will always be horrific because often the real world is more horrific than what you imagine. I think that's a common thing, and normally you sort of tone things down. But I think it's also there is a risk of diluting if you are diluting it too much. If you're like, oh yes, we're going to have about you are cutting away things that are too sensitive. I think it can also become, you can weaken the story itself. You're starting to avoiding things, and then it's like we're going to have a sort of setting about the Second World War and the Nazis, but we're not going to have anything about the Holocaust. We're not even mentioning it. We're just ignoring it. And then you're in some sort of other problem where you're like saying, this didn't happen, or we're not touching it. You don't have to sort of show the concentration camps and go full on that, but I think it is part of the story and the part of the history. So I think it is a balance, but some if you're too afraid of using actual events and actual things, I think it can also hurt the story itself. But again, it all comes to the players and to the audience, and to have an audience that feel that this is something that we can accept and feel okay with. But I think that the cult audience is pretty sort of, they know what they are sort of heading into, so I think they are quite accepting and open to that.
And I also think that historical and real life research can help there, because when it really gets wrong, when you get stories about very difficult things, say the Holocaust, or say malpractices at mental institutions, that's when you start using tropes, because these horrors have become tropes in horror, in pop culture, in other culture. But if you do your research, then you get to the real bottom. Then when you listen to the people who were there, listen to their stories, you watch the films, you watch the pictures, read the real stories, then you find stories that aren't tropes, aren't that they don't trigger you in the same way. You find the real people who were there and experienced it. And I think then the risk of taking the wrong turn is much lesser.
We did consider at one time, Gunilla and I, as far as I can remember at least, to actually write a scenario set in one of the concentration camps. We actually decided to decline that because it got too terrible. You couldn't put horror in a situation that's so much worse than anything you could possibly consider or construct. I mean, the sheer evilness of the concentration camps are basically impossible to do something with, at least in my opinion, because whatever you try to do in a story set in a concentration camp, if the story and the horror is just the concentration camp and the evilness of the Nazis and the entire political structures that allowed them to do this, then it's impossible to do anything apart from that. You could possibly make a scenario for cult without any occult or magical points at all, just set into the horrors that actually living in the concentration camps and dying in the concentration camps.
Why would
you want to do that? Because it would also make a lot of people extremely uncomfortable. It would make a lot of people angry. It would hurt a lot of people. And there's always the risk of those goddamn Nazis actually playing it just to enjoy the situation. So that's one of the very few points that I actually wouldn't touch myself. We have made scenarios about children killing themselves. So we have not that many stops set up for us, but that's at least for me and Gunilla one of the stopping points that we really think it's hard to touch. There might be a few others, I'm not sure.
I think I've gotten more stopping points. Oh, you should turn that off, Mike.
Excuse me just for a second.
Than that, I think when you face real life horrors that have changed people in a way that you can't understand, I mean, that they won't talk to you about. Like, I'm the generation, and Mike is the generation where we knew people who survived the Holocaust, and also other people who have been through totally incomprehensible horrors. You can't really understand what they have been through, how it has changed them, it has made them into, who they are now. Then you should step away from it and say, this is your life, this is your trauma. I can't touch it. I should not try to make a story out of this that happened to you. I think that's very important. you can use terrible things in the periphery as some part of a plot point, but these people's stories, you shouldn't try to tell them through a role-playing game, I think. I think that will turn out wrong and hurtful. Or what do you think, Petter?
Well, I think this is very, as you said, it's very based on what situation it is. So it's hard to say. But I think there are things where you as a writer and as a, well, I guess as a publisher as well. But I think you need to find what is the story. What is the story here that we are telling, and how does it match? If you're just using a terrible story, a terrible setting, or a terrible event, and there is no story really, it's just more of like an experience, that event, and I think it's more I don't really see the point of it. But I think something we can sort of bring up is that we have a campaign that will be released for Cult Divinity Lost, and situations in the world has made it a little bit more sensitive, I would say. But it's a great story that Nils Hintze has written, who is written Väsen and Tales from the Loop and games like those. And he's written this for about 3 or 4 years ago, so it has been, we're sort of polished it and we're waiting, but it will be in the next Kickstarter. And it's called The Dome of Desolation. And it's set in Lebanon in 1983, when you are like journalists in a bombed out city, and there is like a civil war. And Nils has worked, he's a psychologist, and has worked with like people that has been part of that, their stories as well. But the story is about something bigger, and there is an interesting story, and there's a reason why this is the setting. So I think it works, but I can understand that it is a sensitive story, especially with the sort of wars and things that are happening in the Middle East at that time, in our time right now. But if it was just about like the war and the reason for the story was forced, I would probably not see the point of it. But now I think it will be interesting, and I think it's an interesting way of using a real life conflict, and also bring it up into the memory of people, because I don't think that a lot of people knows about Lebanon in the 80s, part of my generation or younger. But I think we have entered into a very bleak territory. I should never have mentioned the Holocaust and Nazis. I think we should go into chupacabras or something like that.
I mean, actually, there's one thing that I since it was already so dark, and the topics that we touch are historic. Do you think there's a way to also give some sort of educational element to incorporating real life horror stories? For example, I'm German, and in Germany, you are, as a student in school, taking several years to kind of process anything from like 1890 to after World War II in detail, to really understand, or at least it was like this back in the days, to really understand what happened, how it happened, and why it happened, so that, you know, our generation was supposed to understand what was going on in detail. And I think, I wanted to ask, do you think you can utilize maybe also role-playing games as an educational tool while giving information about the setting?
So I think, I mean, there are educational role-playing games. And yeah, I think role-playing games can be used in an educational sense. I don't know if Cult is the best vehicle for educational role-playing, since it's centered around strange fringe religious ideas, and has this idea. Conspiracies are a big thing in the Cult universe. I mean, the world is kind of it's a prison, it's a lie, it's a conspiracy. So it's very nuanced, and I think difficult to use in an educational sense without everything bogging down to discussions about, can this be true? What can be true? and you have to sort of counter ideas about conspiracy theories and such that has become mainstream in our times. I think it's cult is a difficult vehicle for that, I think.
It depends upon you want to do with your educational part. If you just want to give some insight into a different time, we are mainly these days writing historical scenarios. Since we are writing for Call of Cthulhu, and we have been written 2 scenarios for the new edition, Divinity Lost of Cult. And one of them was set in 1945 in Berlin, and the second one is set in Stockholm in 1927. And in the 1927 scenarios, we are using historical persons who actually lived in Stockholm at that time. For example, we have Hermann Göring being at the mental hospital at this time, and his family is living there as well. And we actually even placed his dead father being in place in his apartment. If you play the story, you'll realize why we have his dead father in it. But we also put in from Fluchthartung, one of the killers of Rosa Luxemburg, who actually lived in Stockholm at this time. He lived in Saltsjöbaden. And when you realize that you actually have a future war criminal and a secret agent working for this time it wasn't really the Abwehr, but the precursor of the Abwehr from Fluchthartung, living in Stockholm, you have to, there got to be a connection here somehow. So you can start out with historical realities, and you can actually, hopefully, if people ask questions, why do you have this man from Fluchthartung who sounds like a strange, evil James Bond living in Stockholm? Yeah, but he was living in Stockholm. There were a lot of these kind of characters living in Stockholm at these times. And you can show, yes, Hermann Göring was here. He had a Swedish wife. He was spending a lot of time in the mental hospital because he was kind of insane in so many strange ways and using drugs, a lot of drugs. And somehow you can mix in the educational parts here. That's one of the reasons that Gunilla and I enjoy writing historical scenarios, because you can actually put in some real stuff and show them that, yes, reality is very, very strange in itself. And if you then add some extra strangeness, you get a really interesting story. So there's part educational stuff here, but as Gunilla said, perhaps Cult or Call of Cthulhu is not the strongest candidates for educational role-playing games.
I think that there are some parts that in cult that people that awaken something in people. I think that a lot of people that pick up a cult start to like, what is this Gnosticism? And then they start to sort of dive into it and realize, oh, this is something real. Okay, there is a viewpoint about this, and then sort of they go down the rabbit hole. I know several people that have sort of started their occult journeys through cult, because that's sort of the first opening, the first key, the first step to explore something else. I think, just to make, I guess, me and Mikael and Gunilla feel old, I think that just looking at, when they talk about historical settings, I think we can talk about the historical setting of the Black Madonna, which is written in the 90s, which is about like the West and East Germany and its collapse of the Soviet Union. And of course, that was written in the late 80s or early 90s. But I think when you read it now, because I've played it with other players, and I know from players that have played it, like, wow, this is a really interesting time period. And oh, look, they have like ashtrays on every table in every room descriptions, and the descriptions that was like present day when you wrote it has become like part of history now, and people need. Yeah, as we all have. But I think that is also, so you will and I think that you will always learn more in a game that is set in our world and our setting. So I think that you will learn more about New England if you're playing Call of Cthulhu, and what kind of car types and how long it takes to travel across the Atlantic Ocean in a steamship, and probably more about the Lovecraft mythos. But I don't think that education should be part of cult as a concept, because I think that there are, I mean, you can make a like purely educational role-playing game system, but I think if you're playing it in our world and you're using real life person and legends, I mean, people will be knowing like Jim Morrison. Who is Jim Morrison? Oh, it's a real person. Oh, I can Google it. Oh, he has made music. Oh, this music's really nice. Break onto to the other side. That's nice. You know, you can. It will have that consequence. While if you're making a fantasy role-playing game, everything is sort of, you know, a bit loose, I would say.
There's a bit of a strange story considering the occultism and the magic in Cult, the original edition we made in the 1991. We actually got several letters, since these were the days we actually got physical letters in the mailbox. We got several letters from a Swedish Satanist who actually started using our magic system in Cult for real life rituals. And he was very impressed and asked us who we could make such powerful rituals that actually worked.
Yeah.
We didn't answer any of his letters, but it was a strange thing to actually realize. You got fan letters from the Swedish Satanists who actually used your magic rituals. Well, strange life, isn't it?
Yeah. True.
Well, talking from various points from there, I think now we can switch to real life horror legends and myths that are maybe being used as well, such as, not to say one of them, but we have various that are kind of known, like the Mothman, the Chupacabra, Skinwalkers, the Banshee, Jersey Devil, Akaname, and there are various myths and laws that are spreading across the world. Do you have any personal preference, or a myth that you really like and that you maybe even used in a scenario or setting that you incorporated, either modified or
Angels. I
ancient?
mean, Cult has a lot of angels in it because it's based in the Bible religions. So angels are important in Cult.
Yeah. I think
Do
that
they count as monsters?
Yeah, I think that's the interesting thing. I think that it's big, since we're sort of touching upon world religions here. So it's like, I mean, you have like the trolls and goblins and chupacabras and like myths, but we're saying that, yeah, but of course, like all the beings of the Abrahamic religions are also mythical figures. They are not sacred in that sense, so we use them in Cult. They fit with the mythology. They are part of the mythology.
And lots of devils. I mean, Dante's Inferno has given a lot of inspiration to Cult, obviously. But there's a lot of devilish creatures.
But I think one thing that is important when you are adding like the chupacabra or something like that, something that I think that many. Now I'm going to go out on a limb here and sound a bit pretentious, but I'm also dressed in black, so that's okay. I should have a beret. I think that something that a lot of role-playing games do wrong is that they take a legend or a myth and then they just put it in their game. You can take the Chupacabra, or you can take the Mothman, or you can take the Scandinavian trolls or something like that. But they don't sort of connect it to the mythology of their setting. if we would add like the chupacabra in cult, it would be like, okay, but how is this? What is the chupacabra? How is it a creature of Gaia? Is it tied? Is it like a creature of madness that has sort of gotten the myth around chupacabra? And I know we have a scenario that is being played on the horror con that is sort of tied to, not without saying too much, but tied to Jack the Ripper. But it's in I know that the writer has like, okay, but what is Jack the Ripper? What is the myth of Jack the Ripper in cult? It's sort of about a legend. It's set in the modern day, and like, but what has the legend created? And I think that's an important part, because I think that I know I was very. This is a long time ago, and I don't know if it is so still, but I know I was actually very unimpressed, or like when I read the old Call of Cthulhu rule book, and they had like all the Cthulhu monsters, and then you had like a vampire, and it was like Dracula. Yeah, it's a vampire, and he can suck blood, and he had like slept in a coffin, and I was like, but how is this tied to the Cthulhu mythology? Is there also vampires, and like there is a troll in the forest, and for me it became sort of a weird mixture. It's just like you are throwing everything in there. It becomes like a Marvel multiverse, where after a while nothing makes sense. So I think that when you're using real life mythology, it's like, okay, how does this fit into the world that you have created and the world of cult? So I would always say, like, if you're using the Mothman and things like that, which I think, as I see it, it would be, we have the legends in our world. There might be some supernatural reason for that. We have the reason we have that legend. What is the supernatural reason behind the chupacabra that have created the legend in our world? I would not just take the chupacabra and like, here, it just exists. So yeah.
One good thing with cult is that humans are gods. We are gods, and therefore we can be many things. For instance, chupacabras. So you can use the cult setting and have almost any monster, and it's a person.
Yeah, or a creature spawned of madness, or
Yeah.
a nightmare. I mean, it can be a lot of things, but I think it needed to be. You need to think what it is, and also make a twist on it. Just don't just take it like the
No.
chupacabra of legend. Just add
Why
when
would
you
a
see the
person
illusion. What
want
is
to be a chupacabra?
it's
Why
your
would you
fetish.
want to be a chupacabra, Petter?
No, that's your fetish, Gunilla. I don't want to be a chupacabra.
You don't?
I want to be the Mothman.
Okay.
Oh dear.
You don't like goats then?
I want to
No.
be a troll.
The doomed
Yes.
bringer.
Well, then
So
you have to play the lesson.
I think
Good choices.
you shouldn't. Of course, you should keep the scaffolding, the game's base, the logic of the game, but the world, as Michael mentioned, with Luxembourg Killer and all craziness, the world is a lot more strange than we can ever describe it. The real world is the strangest thing. So it's just a matter of getting these elements to work in cult setting. Chupacabras, totally okay, as long as we keep the scaffolding, I say, because this idea that the world is strange, I think that is very important for the cult universe. A kind of Kurt Vonnegut-skiness, if people understand that.
People read Kurt still. I hope they do.
I don't think he is a big seller anymore. Not to
No,
No,
we are very, very, very old.
Considering these parts about using real life legends or myths in cult, yeah, sure. But as Petter said and as Gunilla said, keep the scaffolding, put them into a subset of rules within the cult universe. For example, if I were to use the trolls, the Nordic trolls, these huge creatures living underground, I would say, why is this creature like this? And perhaps I could think about trolls being overgrown lictors, original lictors back from 6,000 years ago when we constructed this prison. Were they part of the creation? Did they run away from the creation? I can see a lot of interesting concepts coming out in a game just of that, what is a troll in cult? Is it a lictor? That's interesting. How did it come out to look like a troll? Why is
Trolls and cult rub me the wrong way.
they don't
Yeah.
they don't see the implications here?
Yeah, but I mean,
Free your mind.
yeah,
You
no,
can
but
live in an apartment building in Stockholm for God's sake, but you're still a troll. And why is this a troll? Why is this lictor a troll? What happened here?
no, I think this is tainting. This is for me. It's tainting the
Your
mythology.
IP.
Yeah, but just it's like if we would like add like superheroes for cult. I mean, we could have superheroes in cult because you can have supernatural abilities. So we could add person with capes and like, but sure we could. But for me it would be just like, no, you're destroying it. So
They
no.
would, of course, die out of drug abuse in a bathtub.
Yeah,
These
that's
superheroes.
the only thing. It would be more like the Watchmen or something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah,
But
Yeah.
wittier. So I thought,
like a dark The Boys.
Yeah, but I think that something we did for Divinity Lost, we added some of these. We had some when it was creatures of madness and creature of dream creatures. I know we added some like creepy pasta legends like the black-eyed children that they had sort of been created by the collective stories of these beings, and that had sort of brought them into the existence because of course mankind is divine and our collective unconscious had brought these creatures made of the madness and dreams into life. So we can also see that as a part of which I think is very cultish, that you can bring life to beings just fearing them but believing them, that your own dreams can manifest and start to haunt you, but also the collective mindset could create something that sort of starts to stalk the night. But I would always, I think it's a sense of it has to do with tone. I think that just because you can fit something into a setting doesn't mean that you should do it. And I think that Lovecraft does it very well with like the Migus and things like that. Sure, they are like aliens from Pluto or Joggot, but you don't have like these UFOs coming like and like you don't add that level to it. At least I don't know if they have that many UFOs in Call of Cthulhu. That is like pure 50s.
they weren't invented.
No, but I mean, it could have been added later. And I think that if you add that to the layer of, then you have like, you have the Cthulhu monsters, and you have like the vampires that live in the castles, and then you have the UFOs as well. Your setting starts to become a bit full and a bit, too many things in it. I mean, I really love the original vampire setting when you had like Vampire the Masquerade. It's like you are the offspring of Cain, you are the clans, and you have like it's very there is a god and there is that mythology. But when you then you add like the mages and the werewolves and the changeling and the wraiths and the street fighters and the weresharks and add it into the world of darkness, and you are like, but this doesn't make sense. It becomes too much. It becomes this. And I think that when you're playing also, I think that most people that play World of Darkness games, they sort of choose the game and they focus on that part of the setting and they ignore the rest because you can't really bring all together. It becomes just like a chaos, I would say. But that's my
I think you're right, actually.
Yeah,
So,
of course. And I mean, I always go back to the real world and to history to ground stories. So, as I said before, the real risk of mixing a lot of tropes and fantasy elements is if you sort of let it become a mere fantasy world. You have to think, what is this about in a human sense? What is this story about? It's always about you, about us, about people, and how and why. And if it's detrimental to the story to call the lictor a troll, then you shouldn't call him a troll.
I like the concept of this lictor troll. You want to
But
write a
Oh,
story about a lictor troll and send it to Petter.
maybe it's a John Bauer troll painting fanatic lictor who is hung up on 19th century troll paintings, and then he has I don't know. What do you say,
Petter just
Peter?
shakes his head.
no, no, it's just disturbing. I think that we can have Jim Morrison, the Pope. I mean, of course, we have a scenario for Divinity Lost when we have both Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton as lictors, so they make an appearance. But they are part of the real world, and yeah.
That's true.
So are trolls.
I just want
No,
to
sorry, Petter.
throw out to the audience. If you have any questions to any of the audience to the panelists,
Yes.
please post them on YouTube, and we'll make sure to pass it along in due time.
Hmm.
I actually have a question for David and Crystal.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Turn it on us.
If it's okay with yes, yeah.
Type
It's
it
like,
to YouTube, please.
what kind of mythological creature would you want to see in the cult setting?
Ooh.
Or real world myth or legend?
I feel like that's a good question. I think from my perspective, I do like conspiracy theories from various aspects. Um, I mean, what I could see, I don't know how to incorporate this, but Crystal and I have been kind of working on some aspects for scenarios, but one of which would be, for example, the whole Plum Island and medical research facility, the what is it called? Manitowoc Monster or something?
Yeah, Manitok monster. Basically, just some animal carcasses washed up on the east coast of the U.S. And there was a conspiracy theory going around that they were genetically modified, and they had different parts of different animals, also different human parts potentially. I think the legend or the conspiracy got a little out of hand, but yeah, they basically believed that they were doing like creepy mad scientist experimentation on Plum Island.
Yeah,
Hmm?
it's more like from that setting, because otherwise, I feel like the cryptids or other kind of beings. Um, yeah, I think I would appropriate, or like I would reconstruct them in the framework of cult rather than to kind of wanted to see the Slender Man or something, because the richness of the monsters that are already kind of available is so splendid that I don't really know where else to go. And then I also like to play the Western and kind of the classical folk horror, and I think in my mind these are separate things. So if I go to folk horror, I try to also stick with kind of traditional cultural ideas, ideologies, and so forth. Versus in cult, it's just different in my sense. I think I don't know how Crystal, what you would say.
Hmm. Um, I mean, I think I would like to see a cult interpretation of aliens. And we can argue whether or not those are mythical creatures or not another time. But yeah, I think
Aliens like
The
The
either
facehuggers and
those or
the
the
xenomorph.
rays. Yeah.
mm,
Basically, people having, experiences where they are kidnapped and taken and experimented on, or, associating with these other beings, going into outer space, that sort of thing. I would like a cult interpretation of that.
it's an interesting thought. I could see them as part of the illusion, part of the people keeping them as prisons, or perhaps some sort of mini lictors or separate creatures in the same role as the lictors. Just there making sure that these extremely strange things, and of course the X-Files were all part of this. They were part of planting the idea within the illusion. So it's the grace is. I started out thinking you meant the xenomorphs. Then I realized it didn't mean the xenomorphs, but the little grace. So yeah, I think the grace could work out within the cult universe.
Yeah, and I think there's a sci-fi opening in cult, since from the beginning humanity was kept in place by religion in a very non-scientific world. But as humanity starts to regain their scientific knowledge, of course the illusion has to adapt somehow. And I mean, that's, I think, important part for Mike and me when we look at cult now, at the meta story, at the illusion story. The lictors, the guardians, they are desperate. They're in dire straits. So, of course, they can do desperate, strange things to stop us from peeking behind the curtains.
Yeah, I think
and
that
the grays are possible.
well, I don't. It's just like adding in a classic werewolf in cult. I mean, like it's very easy to have like bodily transformations, so you can do that. But the classic werewolf, it's a full moon, and you're like, ooh. That's not my cup of tea. I would not do the classic aliens either, but I could clearly see that, you know, people taken to the machine city and metropolis and like being kidnapped and experimented on by the Techrons or some other beings dwelling there, and sort of create a mythology about like abductions and what's happening, for example. And it could be like the part of the illusion or the jailers as well. But again, it's like wrapping it up, because otherwise it's like, okay, so this is the illusion, but we have aliens and they come from another planet and they have great. You are sort of piling stuff there that might be complicated, or that they are tied to the children of the underworld, or the underworld that they take people and they are like these different creatures from another realm that has fallen a long time ago. But I think
So
I would
almost like trolls, Petter.
Well, I think I will remove you from my social contacts now, Gunilla.
The rest of this is just making Petter uncomfortable.
Yes,
with
no, this is where my moral
trolls.
contract is like
No trolls.
written.
I'm sorry,
No trolls.
X card.
We do have a question, or a couple questions from the audience. How would you take a myth or legend and make it so that the players can identify with it?
For starters, they should know about the myth or legend, or would you just telling a story? I mean, if they don't know about it, you can just make it your own, because then it's your story told to them. If it's something they know about, if you all know about the Chupacabra, then you have to find common ground, I'd say. That goes for all role-playing games. How do we regard this legend as a group, as a collective, and how can we together make a good cult story out of it?
It's rather difficult, actually, I think, one has to consider, as both Gunilla and Petra said, the ramification of the cult universe when you bring other things into it. I mean, I like the aliens and the trolls as well, but I do realize that there's a point here that's very difficult to use. And if it's always a good idea to make a game your own, to create your own universe, to make things the way you and your group you're playing with enjoy it. There's also the risk of going so far away to actually created a new game, but that's all right as well. I mean, it's quite okay to make a cult Western game, for example, with immortal gunfighters playing it out in the plains. fighting delictors and whatever. But if you bring, for example, Chupacabra into Cult, I would try to find an interesting twist so that both the player characters and the players will be surprised. It's the nature of the game is, after all, to have fun. So if it's just your own adventure and not a commercial product that has to be actually guaranteed to work with people, for people like Petter, you can always make it just any way you want, but make the twist, make it different, make it your own, and make sure that you actually surprise the players, because nobody will enjoy just going out into the plains and facing a Chupacabra and shooting it out. You can do that in any game. If you're going to do it in Cult, make sure that this goat sucker is something special, something unexpected, and something that both enjoys and surprises your players. That's my little rant.
And cues into the player characters, dark secrets, or who they are. Why should these people be concerned with a goat sucker? Do they have a Mexican background? Is there conflict here between an old goat herding community and the agribusiness? I mean, you should find those connections and then make them culty. So it's also a bit of work, and the farther away your monster comes from the cult universe, I think the more work it is to make it really good.
I just want to have a comment. I think that it's very entertaining to think about that. Like we have like the Black Madonna, which is sort of part of the fall of the Soviet Union and the sort of East and West Germany, and then the next thing we hear is like, yeah, it's a Mexican goat herding community. It's on a different level of conflicts in the big. What exactly was the question? Can you repeat it? Because I sort of listened to Mickey and Gunilla, and but what was the phrasing?
How would you take a myth or legend and make it so that players can identify with it?
Well, I think that Gunilla said a good thing. Now I'm praising. Sorry. Yeah, it's okay.
One time.
That tie it to the characters. I actually think you can take myths that players don't know about and use them, and then they might, because as we said about research, you might get a lot of things when you dive into the myths as well. Like if you can investigate, real world, but you can also investigate myths and find a lot of things about strange religious practices or cults or gatherings or creatures, and it can become a great source of inspiration for the story, and something that the players then can like, oh cool, this has actually happened, or this is actually a myth. So that I think you can use it as that as well. But I agree to try to tie it to the characters. It's a hard question. Damn it. That was the first question, and that was such a hard one.
I think also, following up on all you said, I think important thing throughout any of these aspects is to know your players, to make sure you don't become insensitive, cultural boundaries, and make sure to utilize horror contracts, and that when you start playing a game. I think that's just a common thing that we should point out, that, know your players.
I think doing your research on the things that you want to incorporate into your scenarios, that was actually a common theme with a previous panel that I moderated this morning. Stereotypes, basically avoiding stereotypes in RPG games. And the big theme of that was doing research. Make sure you are knowledgeable in the thing you're writing about.
Me and Gunilla and Michael had a talk before this, like some days ago, and I think Gunilla had a very good word. She called it the Tintin scale. When you are doing like using real life things, and you on one end you have like the Tintin, which is super tropey, almost like cartoonish in how it depicts like China or Congo or trips to the moon, and then you have like reality on the other end, and to sort of find like when is it becoming offensive and where on the scale are you. And for some games you want to be quite close to the Tintin, still sensitive, but you want this sort of like you want the Mexican temple in the jungle, and you want the sort of some of the tropish things. But I think it's a good thing to think about. Where are we on this scale?
And you can twist it, like with the chupacabra. The goat herder community versus agribusiness is a trope. I mean, it's used in lots of movies. But maybe if you do research on goat racing in southern USA, you can find interesting things, and you can use this trope and make something new out of it, and then tie it into cult, and it can be a great thing.
But and again, I think it's good to be sensitive, but I also think you need to be true to the setting, because it's like you will always offend someone with cult, because if I have a strong religious belief, and we're like, oh no, but God is dead, he kept or gone, and he kept us prison. Some people will be offended by that, but if you would remove that, then it would be like then we would need to make up a religion, or perhaps in a whole different world, and then it wouldn't be cult. So I think that you can't use the real world without offending someone. But I think it's important to not do it super clumsily, and don't use like stereotypes. And I mean, it's like if you're using a Catholic priest, don't use the Catholic priest stereotype all the time. It's flesh out the characters and make them real. Again, go back into research, like you be inspired by real people and do that. But I mean, it's you can't get away from that cult is offensive to a lot of people. In a way, I think that Call of Cthulhu isn't, because Call of Cthulhu is something whole different, alien nature. It doesn't really take a stance if God exists or not. It's just that Cthulhu exists, that's for sure.
But Lovecraft is very offensive in many ways. So
Lovecraft is very offensive as a writer and a creator.
Yeah,
yes.
And he has some influence on Call of Cthulhu.
It's something we have to consider a lot, since we are writing quite a lot of material for the Swedish edition of Call of Cthulhu. One of the things one has to consider, this is a bit far away from the original question, and perhaps not even in this panel, but anyway, when we write for Call of Cthulhu, we always make sure that we twist the Lovecraft's racist opinions. We make bloody sure that we do not have any Aborigines or Samis or Mexicans or Native Americans as strange cultists running around in masks killing people. We make sure to change these tropes. Whenever we write scenarios set in Sweden, we make sure that if we're going to have a cult, let's be made out of upper class militaries. Let them be insane worshippers of Azathoth, damaged by the wars, damaged by their time in the Russian Civil War. Just make sure that you avoid the Lovecraft's extremely racist and misogynic opinions, and try to keep away from those things. Be aware of them, but make sure that you twist them and turn them upon Lovecraft and his opinions, because otherwise you will be making a horrible role-playing game, not a horror role-playing game, which is a bad thing. And you will offend a lot of people with your basically racist opinions. I mean, there's a lot of people talking about we have to be real. We have to make sure that we describe the 20s or the 1880s as they were, with racism and sexism and God knows what evil things. But no, we are playing in these days, we are playing with modern people, with modern sensitivities. So if we're going to kick something, make sure that we start kicking upwards. Let's kick at huge evil organizations, political parties that deserves to be kicked upon, but do not attack indigenous people or women or gays or trans people. Let's be respectable. Let's be nice to people. And if you write for cult is different, but if you write for Call of Cthulhu, you have to be aware of Lovecraft and his racist opinions, and you have to make sure that you not fall into the trap of using them. That's a rant from me. Sorry.
I don't completely agree with Michael. Just to have some sort of conflict here, I think that this is good drama. I think I agree in point, but I think it can also become this weird world when you create a 1920s without any oppression, and it's just fine and dandy, and everyone is happy. I know that you're not doing that, because it's always the evil capitalists and the far rightists and everyone else is nice. But I think that for me it becomes a strange it for me it becomes after a while, oh, I'm playing a fantasy game, this is nothing to do with our world. If you are taking away too many parts of how the world looked like. But I guess that's how I can be a little bit of culture gamish, in the sense that we try to imagine how a culture and a time period should be. I don't think it should be an excuse to be like, I want to play a racist asshole. I don't think if you're doing that, you're doing it the wrong way. But I think that if you're removing some things like like the oppression of women never existed in the 1890s, then it becomes okay. So this is a fantasy game we're playing right now. Of course, and then people say, but you have tentacle monsters, and that's a valid opinion.
I
Anyway,
think it's mostly a way of how you twist it. If you make sure that you play, for instance, only among women in the 1890s, then you can show a lot of oppression. So it's more a matter of how you frame the stories, actually. Of course, you don't have to mellow it out. You just don't have to pretend that you tell the stories that were published in the 1920s, because that, of course, is a very select few selected by the views of the time. So
it's not a question for me, at least. I know that Peter knows this, but he wants to construct some drama here. But even so, it's when challenging Lovecraft's opinions, it's only about you have to realize that his writing is brilliant and deeply disturbing. Not because of the outer gods, but because of the racism and the sexism and the anti-Semitism he has in it. And he was extremely racist. I mean, even Robert Howard actually complained and told him, no, you're way too racist. There's something wrong with you. I mean, Robert Howard. This is man who wrote Conan. So it's more a matter about turn upon the table. If you're going to have a cult in Maine, it doesn't have to be black people running around nude with masks on, sacrificing white women. I mean, for
I would
heaven's
say it
sake.
would be super weird in 1920s Lund in southern Sweden as well.
Yeah. But Lund was a very, very male place in the 1920s. And if you want to play a woman there, or a trans person, or anyone who's not a white cis male, then you're gonna be up against a terrible society that's trying to kick you down all the time. And most people don't think that's a fun game experience. Simple as that. So you have to twist the stories to make it possible to make a fun game experience for all people. And I think that goes for cult as well. And it's so personalized, so I think it's easier in cult to just make the character you want.
I think we derailed this thing. Perhaps we should have the question number 2. See if that's
Yeah.
Crystal?
Yeah. So, to get back to the YouTube questions, let's see. So would the player's culture come into play? So I guess this may be along the lines of your previous conversation. You know, bringing in real cultures, bringing in people's actual real life experience or their heritage, and bringing it into gameplay. And they also wanted to provide an example, if you could.
If people's, I mean, again, I think that you mostly know. I mean, I think that when you are playing role-playing games, you play what you know and what you have seen in movies. I think many times when you are playing characters, like if you're playing a Wild West game, it's based on movies you have seen about the Wild West or perhaps books you have read about it. So it's everything has sort of been diluted through a Hollywood lens. But I think it's very interesting to portray, go outside of your bonds or who you are in the real world and try to portray people in a different culture or in a different time and a different concept, and try to give a guidance and an understanding how it can be to be those people at that time and in that culture and in that context. It's quite a lot to get hold of, and you can often do it very wrongly. And I think here is where you easily fall into the sort of stereotype trap as a player and as a group. And I think it's very easy for at least us Scandinavians, or at least we might think it's very easy to play people of like the North American cultures, like we are playing people in New York, because we have seen so many movies and it seems very similar to us. But if we're going for the Mexican goat herding community and we're playing people there, it will be more for the players to dive into and to sort of know the culture context. I think it's super interesting. And if I'm going to give an example, is that we have a person writing for Cult who is from Russia, and we played before the war and everything like that. We played a sort of scenario that he had written set in Moscow, and just for us Scandinavian players to be like, okay, but you are playing in Moscow and you are playing people in Russia, and we have like these people from Dagestan, and we have the Chechens, and we have these different groups, and this is how Russian society looks about their leader, the Putin and Kremlin, and they have the FSB, and in a way it's a culture that is super close to ours. We have like cell phone, everything is very similar, but it was still quite different just to sort of get into the mindset and understand society and how the city worked. But I think once we got there and got a feeling for Moscow and playing, I think one of us sort of cheaped out because he was playing actually a Swedish person that had come to Moscow, so it was simple because he was the odd man out. But even that was kind of challenging from a sort of cultural standpoint. But once we got there, I think it was extremely rewarding. But it sort of needs to, you need to give information to the players that is so, I mean, you can't expect them to like read a book, like here is 300 pages about Russian culture and history and stuff like that. But I think it's good to give them like a paper, like two sides of paper, like this is about how you think about, how should you think different when portraying people. This is like the common norm, this would go against the common norm, this is seen as not okay, this is in like if you're raising a child, slapping your son is okay because you know that's not a weird thing in Russia, people wouldn't be upset, you know. And when you get into that, I think it becomes an interesting mindset. Sorry, ramble. I will throw it up to Mikael and Gunilla.
Yeah, I think it's important for the game master to know the setting.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing. You can try to portray a person from a very different culture if you read up on it and if you help each other, but it's very difficult for a game master to delve into something very different. But of course, if your group want to play, say, ancient Mayas, and you're from Stockholm, go for it. I mean, it won't be ancient Mayas, of course it won't, but you will create a story, and this is what people object to as cultural appropriation, I know, but if you do it in your own sitting room, 5 people who want to have an experience inspired by ancient Maya life and myths, I think that's great.
Yeah.
So as long as everybody is on the train and think it's a good experience, I think it's great. And the more, as we said before, do research, the more you know, the better it'll be.
Yeah, I have to agree with both Gunilla and Petter here. Basically, research, if you're going to play in a very, very different milieu, area of play, for example, ancient Maya, or just even the American West. For example, if you actually start, we've been writing some stuff for a Swedish Western role-playing game a long time ago, and one of the first things we realized that was people's opinion, at least here in Sweden, about American West was totally off. We were totally indoctrinated by Hollywood movies and novels, cheap paperback novels about the American West, where all the cowboys were white men. Everybody wore a gun low on their hips. Everybody had a Stetson and a side knotted shirt, and they started out having duels on the main street. And oh my God, what wrong that was when we started researching. I mean, a lot of the cowboys were not white, a lot of them were not males. There was a lot of prostitution in the Old West, yes, but it was rather common with male prostitution as well, because there was not very many women around. Cross-dressing was kind of usual in much different way than we were used to. So when you started doing your research, we were writing a supplement about the Indian Territory, Oklahoma in the 1880s. You realize that things are very, very different. So do your research, and if you're going to publish this, in these days, we would make rather sure that somebody who actually knew something about this, or somebody who actually was a Native American, took a good look at what we were writing. And this is if for commercial productions only. Whatever you do in your own home is basically your own story. But if you're going to publish it, make damn sure that you don't hurt somebody with your insignificant, with your lack of knowledge, and an easy way out for rather strange tropes. But keep the facts, and if you're going to publish it commercially, make sure that it's all right. Let somebody control read it for you. But otherwise, go for it. I mean, for heaven's sake, we have one of our greatest experience ever in role playing was playing an extremely 20-year-long campaign with Gunilla as knights in Pendragon. I mean, for heaven's sake, it was a very, very strange world. But Gunilla's research made the world much more living. We based it on real maps and a real part of England. And it's changed a lot of things for us. It's made a real good campaign. But of course, it was nothing like the real time in the 600s in England. But just for that, it worked out fine. So I guess I'm a bit confused about this, because a game like Pendragon can never be correct. It's
But
always a romantic version of knights running around on having duels. And we can make a real game out of Wild West because we know something about it. But after the 1400s or 1500s, things start to get difficult. You really don't have any sources that you can trust anymore. So it's very difficult.
if I may just step in, I think that playing like Pendragon or a mythological King Arthur tale is never offensive either, because it's clearly it's more like a fantasy game. Very few people will say like, I think you portrayed the Knights of Lancelot was portrayed in a bad way. I mean, you need to be a very die-hard fanatic. I think it's good to be sensible, especially when you are publishing things, and be careful. But I think you should never be afraid to create. I think that you should never be, if you really want to tell a story about the set in a culture that is not yours, and you feel like, I want to tell this story that is set in Tokyo, and you're playing hard-working people in Tokyo, and the Japanese population is tied to the cult mythology. I mean, if you really feel the urge for it, you should do it. I don't think that, and you should try to research and look up and do your best. But I mean, never feel that, oh, I could not put this scenario online because what if people are angry about it? I mean, I think it's also become a thing that people get very upset about things, but I don't think that you really hurt that many people. It's very easy to look away from that if you don't want to use it, and I don't think you should stop yourself from creating these stories, because then I think you might miss out on something really, really good and exciting. So I think you should be brave and create, but if you're going to publish it, and I think also when you play it, do some research. I mean, I think all the tools we have with YouTube and Wikipedia, and like, we can do a lot of basic research just there, even if you just scratch the surface. So I think you should always be brave and create, and try to. Well, the worst thing is that people will be angry, and but I mean, then you have written something at least and published it.
Okay.
But be a bit careful, because as Gunilla and I realized in the 1990s, you can actually get some strange religious groups starting a hate campaign against you.
True. So do you mean that you wish that you hadn't written cult now?
No, never.
Exactly.
But just saying that.
But we did our research, so we could answer the fanatics. You should do that.
But just realize, if you write something extremely controversial, you might get some trouble out of it. But it's worth it, yes. You probably get somebody to help you as well. So we got the Swedish State Church to protect us.
Yeah.
It was the Word of Life that started a campaign against us. So we were actually called the most evil people in Sweden in a major Swedish newspaper.
Oh.
And I would say it's only for Gunilla. So.
That didn't make our moms very happy with us, can I tell now?
Fantastic. I think we're unfortunately reaching the end, and I want to end with actually also a question from the audience, which focuses a bit on each of you and on the myth. So, what uses of myths and legends in your own writing are you the most proud of or the most happy about?
I'm happy the way we merged Gnosticism and Kabbalah when we made scaffolding for cult. I think it's a very nice use of fringe Christian and Jewish myth to make a world out of.
Petter?
Oh dear.
Michael?
I'm probably most proud of of course, we are very proud about cult, and I'm perhaps proud of the concept that we turned about the concept of Call of Cthulhu from turned humanity into the enemy, humanity into the insane gods that threaten the multiverses. So I thought that was a nice thing. So it's perhaps a bit sad to be most proud about things that's 30 years old, but of these later days, I think we are both proud about our source books about Lund for Call of Cthulhu Sweden, which were well researched and done with a lot of other talented people as well. But later days, perhaps Lund and the research we did for Lund and actually putting Lund is a real city in the southern part of Sweden, and we merged the universe of Call of Cthulhu with real life city, which is a bit different from doing it with a non-existing city like Arkham. So that actually merging of a real place with the Cthulhu Nighters turned out rather nice. We did some nice use of the Shub-Niggurath mythos with the agricultural processes in Skåne. This is southern part of Sweden. So I'm proud of that. So yeah, Petter got a lot to be proud of. Cult, for example.
Yeah, no, I think I must agree with Mikael and Gunilla. I think that what they did when combining Gnosticism with Kabbalah and all that part really was a stroke of genius. But I'm proud with the fourth edition as well. I think that was just tying it closer to the principles and how the illusion is sort of held together. Otherwise, I'm proud of an upcoming thing for Cult when I have been writing about a scenario set in a dream world when I have sort of deconstructed fairy tales that are stories in this dream world, and I feel that I feel very fresh. It's not the sort of classic you would expect. You go and find a gingerbread house in the woods, like you just take the fairy tale and put it in, but it's sort of the underlying factors of the sort of tales. It is a scenario about stories and about dreams and one of the dream worlds. And I think it feels, even if it's not finished and it's playtested right now, it feels very good and it feels very cult. It's like it's not just the chupacabra. It's what does this represent, and you can sort of, the dream may shift, and you might see that the wolf in one dream represents something, and then in another dream it has shifted, but it's still the wolf, but it's a completely different figure and the sort of the core representation. So I think that will be pretty interesting when it comes out and see what people like. But I think that you sometimes feel when you write that, this can probably be good. So I think that was an interesting using myths and psychology of fairy tales.
Sounds bloody interesting.
Exciting.
Indeed. Well, yeah, I think with that we've reached the end of this panel, unfortunately. Thank you everyone watching and contributing questions. I want to thank Gunilla, Michael and Petter for agreeing to join us in this fantastic topic, and I think it was a very interesting discussion from my perspective, and to get also your insights, especially for a system that I've learned to appreciate more and more. So yeah, thank you very much for it. For all of you watching, we will conduct the next panel in shortly, about 4 hours, which will be designing compelling villains and monsters for horror RPGs with Grim Patrick, Scott Dorward, Tia Newman, Jason Fryer, and John Hook. So stay tuned for the next panel coming up. And thanks again, our panelists, for this wonderful discussion.
Thank you.
And have a
Thank you
wonderful
for having us.
Enjoy the rest of the
Evolution
con.
HorrorCon.
Thank you.
Bye.